we decided that we wanted to kind of plan out and see like what exactly is needed. How many snakes do we need? How much money it would be required to be invested in order to have a decent shot of being able to make a full-time living for one person breeding ball pythons. So the context that we're setting up for this video is that we are trying to make, on a consistent basis, $50,000 a year solely from breeding ball pythons. And there are other streams of revenue that can come in. This could be like social media, whether you are monetized on YouTube or Instagram or anything like that. And that can help. And there's always different types of sales, such as if you were buying animals wholesale and then selling them retail, that is also a viable option. But this would be if you are solely wanting to make $50,000 only from breeding animals and selling the animals that you have produced. So let's jump into it. Going off of a video that we made in the past about like knowing who your target market is, because I do think that if you're trying to have a full-time business or a full-time income from breeding animals, specifically ball pythons, you should pay attention to your marketing and who your ideal customer is and what would best serve them. So we are going to be looking at really 3 different scenarios here. And the first one is what type of business, what type of strategy, what would you need if you were primarily wanting to sell to pet owners? So when I say pet owners, these are meaning that the animal that you would be producing, the average sale price of it would be $300. How many animals do you need to sell? How many animals do you need to have breeding? How much equipment do you need in order to support a income of $50,000 a year by primarily selling $300 animals? The second scenario that we're going to be talking about is if you were trying to, instead of selling primarily to pet owners who just want a beautiful animal to love and enjoy simply for being a pet. Instead, if you were trying to sell primarily to people who are just getting into breeding, like hobbyist level breeders, this type of animal is going to be different. It's probably going to be a bit more expensive. It's probably going to be focused more on a recessive, most likely. And the average sale price, the key defining characteristic for this scenario is that these animals on average, if you were selling primarily to hobbyist level breeders, are $1,000 per animal. Again, same thing. How many animals do you need to sell? How many breeders do you need? And how much equipment do you need in order to sustain all of it? And then the last one is if you wanted to go on the high end, if you wanted to go for investment animals, and that the main people that you would be selling to are those who either have been in for quite a while or those who have the income that they would be investing in high-end animals. What does that look like? Again, the defining characteristic of this group is that the average sale price of these animals are $2,500. So now that we have the kind of groundwork laid out, let's start from the very, very end goal, like $50,000, and we're going to work our way back. To make $50,000 a year selling primarily pet ball pythons with an average sale price of $300, you actually have to sell, it's like 166.66666. So because we can't do a fractional snake sale, we're just going to say you have to sell 167 baby hatchling ball pythons a year. And there are a couple challenges, I think, on this. Well, here, first we'll go on pros. One, these animals are going to have the widest possible market because there are way more reptile keepers than there are breeders. And I know that it might not seem like that much because if you're watching this video, you're probably really, really into the ball python breeding community on social media. Otherwise, you wouldn't have found us. But think about how many people watch Brian Barczyk's videos or Snake Discovery or anything like that. There are millions of reptile keepers and millions of people who don't even know that they would love a reptile. So this audience is the biggest audience, but because it is the biggest audience and kind of the least invested in the hobby, it might be also kind of hard to find them. But if you are able to make 167 baby ball pythons a year and you're able to sell all of them for an average sale price of $300, you will be able to make $50,000 a year breeding ball pythons. Now, moving on to the next one. We'll do on if you are trying to sell primarily to entry-level hobbyist breeders, these animals we are going to say are going to cost about $1,000 a piece. So significantly more expensive. Actually, it's more than 3 times as expensive as the last group. But because they are more expensive and there is way more people that are really, really active on social media. I actually think that this one might be a little bit easier to market to, because if you are watching this video, or if you're on Instagram, if you're on YouTube, TikTok, anything like that, it's pretty easy to find other breeders. And as long as you're making animals that those other breeders can use in their projects, these ones might be better to sell. You could sell them on Morph Market, you could sell them at reptile shows. These ones are going to be a good one, kind of all around middle ground. But if you are trying to make $50,000 a year selling animals that are on average $1,000 a piece, you need to sell 50 of them. I know that that's like crazy math, but you need 50 ball python hatchlings a year that you can sell for an average of $1,000 a piece to make $50,000 a year. And then the last group that we're going to be talking about are the investment level, the high-end ball pythons. And for reiterating what we said at the beginning, these ball pythons are on average going to sell for about $2,500 a piece. And I know that prices differ, and somebody might hear that price and be like, $2,500 isn't an investment level animal. But the thing that I want to say on this is that if you were trying to do investment animals with sunset, you compare a sunset to a het sunset, and you might make some visual sunsets that are $5,000, and you might make some het sunsets that are $1,000, and the average price between that is $2,500. So even though we're saying $2,500 the average price, that doesn't mean that you can't have higher or less expensive animals. It's just the average. And in order to make $50,000 a year off of an average price of $2,500 per animal, you need to be able to sell 20 investment level animals every single year. We kind of talked about this a little bit already with the pet one, but as you can see, the lower the price, the more that we have to sell. And the more that you have to sell means that you have to do a lot more work marketing to a wider audience. Because I don't know if anybody's noticed this, but just in case you haven't started selling ball pythons yet, the work to sell a $300 snake and the work to sell a $2,500 snake is actually more work to sell the $300 snake, because often you are having to explain lots of different things to the newer keeper, and there's nothing wrong with this, it just kind of lets you shine on customer service, than somebody who's wanting to buy a $2,500 snake who probably already has all of the information that they need, as long as you give them their hatch date, their parents, their weight, stuff like that. But if you are trying to do the pet animals, you need to sell a lot more than all of the other kind of groups. So you need to be really, really good at marketing yourself to lots of people who are not necessarily already in the hobby. So if you can have a platform in order to reach out to people who might like to buy a ball python but haven't already, you are going to do really, really well in the pet arena. If you are looking at selling primarily animals to other breeders, specifically kind of like newer breeders, this group is, I actually think, probably the easiest one to go down, because the ball python community, especially on Instagram and YouTube, is really, really strong. So if you, as I said earlier, can make an animal, maybe it's like a leopard spot nose het clown female, it's really, really likely that you're going to be able to find somebody that wants to buy that animal, as long as you market yourself accordingly. You don't need as big of an audience in order to sell these animals as you do for the pet ones, and you don't necessarily have to go to a bunch of local reptile shows in order to sell them either, because you can if you want to, but these animals are more likely to sell on Morph Market than sub $300 snakes, because the shipping costs of sending the animals isn't such a high percentage of the total price. So people are more willing to buy a $1,000 animal and pay $50 in shipping than they are willing to pay $300 with $50 in shipping. So something to keep in mind. I actually think that the targeting like newer breeders is a really, really good strategy if you're trying to make $50,000 a year as a full-time business. And then the last one, the high-end animals, these ones are the least amount. You only need to sell 20 of them a year, but these animals are significantly higher price tag, and that the significantly higher price tag actually excludes a huge portion of the market that might want to buy them but cannot afford them. So when you are marketing a sunset or het sunset or any other really, really high-end project, you have to be really, really good at targeting your advertisements in order to, and by advertisements I mean content, whether it's on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. You need to be really, really good at putting your information, your content in front of the people who are, one, most likely to buy from you, and I don't mean this in any like kind of rude way, but really, really big breeders probably are never going to buy a just sunset from us. because there are other people who are more established and they have better relationships with other bigger, more established breeders who have stuff that they are looking for. That said, if you are able, like for us, if we were putting out this video or any of the marketing videos, the people who watch these marketing videos most likely are people who want to take their ball python business really, really seriously, because marketing isn't the most exciting topic. Why else would you be sitting down and listening to me talk for 30 minutes a week or whatever it is? So the thing is, if you're able to put your content in front of the audience that's most likely to buy from you, and you're able to provide value, I think you can do a really, really good job in the investment level arena. But the pet owners at local shows or the really, really entry-level breeders probably are not going to have the money to afford the high-end projects, so you are limiting your overall market size. You just have to be really, really good at putting the right content in front of the right people if you want to go the investment route. Moving away from marketing, kind of positioning and all that, let's go into how many breeders do you need in order to produce all of those different levels of hatchlings. So in this assumption, we are going to assume that from each clutch, you are getting 6 eggs that you want to sell. And this might be that on average there's 6 eggs and you sell all of them, or there might be like a holdback or 2 you hold from each one. But each clutch, you get 6 eggs that we sell from them. And for the pets, for the pet group, we need a minimum of 28 breeder females in order to get the 167 hatchlings with 6 eggs per clutch. And realistically, we need more than that. We need more breeder females than what the minimum takes, because not all females go every single year. And if you are relying on this as your full-time income, you need to have enough cushion so that way you can soften any like bad luck or anything like that. So when we're looking at this, if you want to make $50,000 a year breeding ball pythons, specifically pet ball pythons that are in about the $300 range, you need to have what we are going to say is 35 breeder females going every single year. In addition to that, you need males. And in order to have enough males to all of those females, we don't necessarily want to stretch the males too thin, but males can go to multiple females. And generally for us, we say a male can go to about 3 to 4 females and you don't really have to worry about anything. So in this situation, with 35 breeder females, you need 9 breeder males for a total of 44 snakes is what you need as breeders in order to have a chance, a solid chance at making $50,000 a year selling primarily pet ball pythons. Going on to the breeder group, and by breeder, these are all breeder animals, but I'm talking about the animals that primarily produce hatchlings that are going to appeal to other breeders, specifically newer breeders, entry-level breeders, things like that. And for this group, you need significantly less ball pythons because we need to produce significantly less hatchlings. So in order to make the 50 ball pythons in this group that would result in the $50,000 a year, we need a minimum of 9 breeder females. But again, we always want to have a little bit of cushion, so we're actually going to say 12 breeder females is what you need in this group. And because we can do 1 male to about 4 females, we need 3 males. And that might stretch the males a little thin, but it should be good because if 1 male doesn't lock, you can push a little bit higher than 4. But like I said, it's safe to say that 3 males can service 12 females, 1 male to 4 female. Now, this is significantly less amount of animals. In fact, you only need to have room for 16 breeders in this case, which is going to help out a lot when it comes to equipment costs. But the last group that we're looking at, in order to have 20 investment level animals, you need a minimum of 4 breeder females. But again, this is like not good because we don't want to risk 1 of the females or 2 of the females or something like that not going when we need them. And because so much is riding on each individual animal in this scenario, we're still going to add in some wiggle room here. So we're going to go with 5 breeder females is what you need in the investment level in order to produce the 20 hatchlings that you need to sell every single year, and 2 males. And so you could probably push it to 1 male, but again, we don't want to rely on 1 single male during a breeding season, and if the male doesn't lock or the male doesn't go off feed or anything like that, you want to have a backup. So we are saying In the breeder or in the investment level, you need 5 breeder females and 2 breeder males for a total of 7 snakes. Next thing that we want to talk about is how much would it cost if you were to buy all of these animals outright. And I don't necessarily mean that you're buying them as breeders, but if you bought all of the animals that you need for each of these groups throughout several years or anything like that, how much would you actually be investing in snakes? Now, I do know that it is 100% possible and probably a good thing to not go out and buy every single one of these snakes first, and instead to start small and hold back animals and build up. But this is just under the assumption that as soon as you are breeding, so in this case it would be year 3 if you're buying all of these as hatchlings, then you are able to make the $50,000 a year. But you can start slow, you don't have to start this right away. But if you were gonna buy all of them, what you need is roughly for the 35 females and 9 males. We're gonna assume that the average price of these animals, because they're producing roughly $300 snakes, is going to be roughly $300. You might be able to get like a single gene Mojave female for $100, but you might buy some Bell males for $500, and it just averages out to about $300. But in this situation, to get to the 35 females and the 9 males, you would need to invest $13,200 if, on average, each of the breeders that you got were $300 each. If you were going to try to go the selling to breeders, entry-level enthusiasts, things like that route, you need significantly less snakes, but these snakes are also significantly more expensive. Again, we're going off of they are on average costing, as a hatchling, $1,000 a piece, but you only need 12 females and 3 males, so for a total of 15 snakes, or at $1,000 a piece, $15,000 is what you would need to invest in order to really, really hit the enthusiast level breeder if you are trying to make $50,000 a year breeding ball pythons. And then the last group, for the investment level, 5 females, 2 males, 7 snakes in total at an average price of $2,500 means that you would be investing in snakes $17,500. Now, the thing that I think is really interesting is the investment does have the highest price tag, but realistically, it's not that much higher than the other ones. And somebody might say that $1,000 itself is really, really high, and that there is a difference of about $4,000 between the investment snakes and the pet snakes. But in the grand scheme of a business, especially over several years, because you don't have to buy these snakes all at once, you can spread this out over several years, it's not that much money. And I do think that there is a really, really interesting thing going on here, and this is that the investment level snakes almost always, investment level and the breeder snakes, are almost always, on average, going to create animals that are going to fit into the pet range. We'll go to sunsets, for example. A male, single gene, normal, or maybe an Inchy or Mojave or anything like that, het sunset, that snake is probably only going to go for about $200 to $500 at most. And this doesn't mean that it is going to be the most beautiful, amazing snake that's ever been around, especially when you can compare it to all of the combos that you can make, or a bell, or anything like that, but it does fit into the pet range. So even though you're doing the investment side, that doesn't mean that you wouldn't have animals to sell for pets. But going off of the actual price of the snakes, now we need to look at the enclosures, because you can't just have these snakes roaming around your house free, even though a lot of people who are not part of the reptile hobby think that that's what happens. Instead, you need equipment like these racks, or whatever it is. And there is lots of different ways to mitigate the cost in here, whether it's DIY or anything like that. But in this situation, we're actually going to set it up as the ARS racks, with the idea that this is intended to be a business and not just simply like a one and done kind of thing. So if you were to buy ARS racks, you don't have to go upgrade them later on if you had started off with DIY. And that doesn't mean you have to upgrade DIY racks. We have DIY racks, but we did notice that the ARS racks have such a high quality difference and like convenience difference. Like, they were made specifically for this, that they just blow our DIY racks out of the water. So because of this, even though you don't have to start with these, we're just going to use this price as if you had bought these racks initially. And for the pets, you have significantly more animals than the other groups. So in order to handle this, we want one 70/30 ARS rack, which is going to be about $3,000 with shipping, in order to hold our females. We had 35 females, remember? And we are going to have one 5540, which is again about $3,000, give or take, with shipping to hold all of our males, the rest of our females, and potential holdbacks that we have. And again, the holdbacks might be small at first, but you'll see in a second. So between the breeder racks, we have about $6,000 invested in this situation. But because we are going to have 167 hatchlings at a minimum to sell, we need to make sure that we have room for all 167 hatchlings. And with ARS, that means that you would need 3 1065 racks, which would end up being about $9,000 just for the hatchling racks. So even though the snakes were a little bit less invested and a little bit less of an investment, there is a significant increase in investment when it comes to enclosures because of how many more animals that you have to have. So overall, you need about $15,000 in racks in order to house all of the animals that you would need in order to make $50,000 a year selling $300 snakes. One other thing that I want to hit on for this specific one is that there is a space requirement that is aside from the enclosure requirement. And what I mean by this is that these enclosures are really, really big and they take up a lot of space. I know that people who are not part of the reptile hobby think that this is like, oh, they're drawers. These are huge. These ARS 7030s, they have a bigger floor space than a 20-gallon aquarium. And I think that this is really, really interesting because it means that there is a limited number of these racks that you can keep in a bedroom or in an extra room or a rec room, or even like us, we have a 12 by 20 foot shed that we've finished and that's our shop, and there's a finite amount of space. There's a finite amount of room for racks that we can keep, which means that there's a finite amount of snakes that we can keep as long as we stay here. So when you are planning to try to make $50,000 a year breeding pet ball pythons, you have to keep in mind how much actual space do you have at your house or at a facility that you can fit all of those different racks that you need in them. Moving on from the pet one, we're going to jump back over to the breeder group. And the breeder group, significantly less snakes. We only have 12 females and 3 males that we have in this situation, and for all of our breeders, we're just going to go with one 70-30. And even though that would only fill up half of the spots in the 70-30, it gives us room for holdbacks, it gives us room for growth later on, and realistically, I think that the cost benefit of buying the racks all in one, like one big one, kind of outweighs the slightly cheaper price of getting like a 70-20 or a 70-10. This all is dependent on budget, it's dependent on the space that you have available, but if it was us, we would get one 70-30 if we were trying to get enclosures for like breeder group where we are trying to make $50,000 a year and we have 15 breeder animals. But we still want to have a hatchling rack because we need to have about 50 hatchlings for sale every single year, make them sold, so we want to get one 1065, and between these two racks we're looking at a total of about $6,000 for racks for the breeder group. Last we have the investment group, way less snakes. We only have 7 snakes in this situation, 7 breeders that we have, and anticipated at least 20 hatchlings to sell. So we still want to get our hatchling rack. It's still going to be a 1065. It's still going to be $3,000 because again, we want the room for growth. But when it comes to our like full size rack for our breeders, because we only have 7 snakes in this situation and it will take several years before we get up, instead of going for the 70-30, we did go for the 70-20 in this one, which is about $2,000. So you have roughly $1,000 savings in this one to have all of the enclosures you need. For the investment group, you're looking at about $5,000 total. So total costs. And I know that there's costs in rodents, there's costs in electricity, but simply on these snakes and equipment, if you are going to invest into all of these different things, just like we kind of set up, and again, this doesn't have to be all at once, but at the end of the day, to get all of the ARS racks, all of the snakes that you need, you would need to spend $28,200 to get all of the stuff you need in order to have a good shot at making $50,000 a year breeding pet ball pythons. This is going to require a lot of work marketing towards people who are not in the hobby already, because the people who are going to be buying the pet animals probably don't have as much of an interest in breeding as other ones, and therefore it's a different market in that they're not already part of the reptile community as strongly as the other groups are. Now, if you are trying to sell primarily to entry-level breeders or enthusiast-level breeders with $1,000 snakes on average, you are going to need to spend about $15,000 in the snakes, and you're going to need to spend about $6,000 in the racks for a total of $21,000. And instead of having to sell 167 snakes a year, you only have to sell 50 a year to make the 50,000. And this is actually $7,000 less of an investment than the $28,000 a year if you're primarily looking to sell pet ball pythons. And then the last one is if you're going for the high end and you want just a couple animals, just a few animals, 7 breeders, and only having to sell 20 animals a year, maybe you have really, really small space, maybe it's like a really small bedroom, or you're keeping the snakes in your regular bedroom. In this situation, to get all of the snakes you need to spend about $17,000 in snakes, roughly 17.5, and then $5,000 in racks for a total of $22,500, which is $1,500 more than the entry-level breeder group, but it is still about $6,000 cheaper than if you were trying to make $50,000 a year selling pet ball pythons. Now, I had mentioned this at the beginning of the video a little bit. You don't have to buy all of these animals at once. You don't have to buy all of these animals, period. You could start out where you have a couple pairs, maybe like 3 breeder females that are all Mojaves, and you have 1 bell male, and you pair them to those females, and then you get bell females, and you hold them back, and over the years you can get to it. But the thing that I want to kind of talk about is that even if you're going to do this kind of philosophy, this kind of strategy, you still need to make sure that you are trying to get to the proper level of numbers in whatever kind of sphere that you want. Also, you don't have to do only one of these. We don't do only one of these. We have some high-end projects. We have some like enthusiast level breeder projects, and we have projects that we specifically built for pet owners. So you can mix and match. You don't have to do it all at once, but for ease of use, this is kind of showing that in order to make $50,000 a year, it's going to take either a lot of time or a lot of money. And one thing that I think is really, really interesting is that you can always make more money depending on how well you do, how lucky you get, how much work you put in, but you will never make more time. So just something to keep in mind when you are deciding how you want to try to make $50,000 a year breeding ball pythons.